When hope is hiding her face and you're half an inch away from the world, when all you feel's out of place and the flag of your fixation's unfurled, it's a fine line between a groove and a rut.
I am the Director of Programs in Israel Education at the Jewish Theological Seminary of America. Try saying that 3 times quickly after a glass of wine. We spent a lot of time talking about the vision of the program, really working on what did we learn from literature, what have we learned from our own wisdom of practice, what have we learned from our experience with our students, and what's the vision of the program, what do we really want this program to have as its vision. So some days, a typical day means coming to Shoken here and teaching a class, being in a meeting with somebody either a student or somebody from the Shoken staff or somebody from the Kesher Hadash staff. Let's talk about what are the goals for the Shabbaton. Okay. We've got the final Shabbaton in Tel Aviv. What are the goals for the Shabbaton? And other days can be like we did today, a day when you're out in the streets in Jerusalem, meeting interesting people, introducing the students to interesting people. So it's really very varied. We really believe that Hebrew is a really critical access point to Israel and Israeli society. There's a great quote by Chaim Nachman Bialik, the Hebrew poet and sort of early poet laureate of the early Zionist movement. He said that reading a text in translation is like kissing the bride with the veil still on.
על סיפורים קצרים של עגנון. מישהו קרא ספרים שלו? של עגנון? קראתם פעם? באנגלית?
Many long-term Israel programs bring students to Israel, and the program is kind of insulated from quote-unquote real Israelis. It takes place in a Bet Midrash, in a university classroom, with a lecturer who may be Israeli or may be like a pretend Israeli like me. But when it works at its best, you get intense social interaction around content between Americans and Israelis in dialogue with each other. It shouldn't be me who says why we're here. It should be one of you who says why we're here, because it's about constructivist education.
So we just went to this amazing store where they have all of these different signages and posters from Israel, mostly from Israel and pre-Israel history, and we got a budget to come in groups and think about a potential trigger for an activity.
See around you in the environment, use things that you collect to create really interesting conversations about Israel.
Everyone is going to get this really cool magnet, and now what we're going to do is I want you to connect the verses that we just read about to what's happening in this picture here. All right, good. What do you see?
We make Encounter a core part of the Kesher Hadash curriculum. Encounter is a 2-day overnight experience which involves meeting Palestinians in Bethlehem, in the Bethlehem area, and that's really important, I think, because wherever you are politically on the spectrum, left to right, up and down, it doesn't matter. First of all, the conflict with the Palestinians is part of Israel education, whether we like it or not. It's not the only part, and it shouldn't be the only part, and Israel education should be a much wider thing than that, but it's certainly an important part of it, and whether you try to run away from it, and it'll come back to bite you in the tushy. We also want to flesh that out with Jewish Israeli narratives around the conflict, and so we do a program called Perspective, which is similarly a 2-day overnight trip looking at different Jewish Israeli narratives around the conflict with the Palestinians, from the right and the left, but going to Sderot, meeting people in the Gaza, in the area around Gaza.
Put your parts, and when you come back to Israel again, you need to find it.
Going to the West Bank and meeting people in a Jewish settlement, and also meeting Israelis from the centre and from the left, Jewish Israelis from the centre and the left. And the idea is that having done both of those programs, that the students have met a pretty wide range of Jewish and Palestinian voices around the conflict. And then you guys do that as you do with it. I view my role as the shadchan, as the matchmaker to make a match between the students and a whole variety of experiences, and then it's up to each student to decide what they do with them, how they build those experiences into their own vision of Israel education, how they put those things together.
Would someone like to raise an amendment or perhaps add or subtract from this statement?
Delete it.
Meretz calls to delete
Second.
section 7C from this bill, seconded by Likud. Continue with section 2, democratic states. The state of Israel has a democratic regime. Would anyone like to speak on the matter? Chair recognizes the member of Knesset on the list.
Democratic means all the people on the ground. Nowhere have I heard anything about the Arab people. So I will agree that there is a regime in the state of Israel, but I will not concede that it is democratic.
I think the engagement with Israel, Israel is a complicated, messy, fantastic, and am I allowed to say fucked up? Probably not. Is a fantastic and messed up place. And that's the reality of the country. If you want to do Israel education, you want to engage with Israel, you've got to engage with that stuff. You've got to engage with the stuff that gives you goosebumps on your arm, and you've got to engage with the stuff that makes you tear your hair out because it's so screwed up. And it's got to contain all of that. And I think that most American youth are looking for a way to engage with Israel that contains all of that stuff.
When hope is hiding her face and you're half an inch away from the world, when all you feel's out of place and the flag of your fixation's unfurled, it's a fine line between a groove and a rut.